Hey there, and welcome to the Agentic Voice Podcast. In today's episode, we are discussing empowering singers through the use of storytelling. My name is Kristen Ruiz, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Dr. Geneva Main, and our featured guest today, Bill Wesbrooks. We love your support, so don't forget to follow and subscribe to our channels on Instagram, YouTube, and your favorite podcast platform. Drop us a note and let us know what you'd love to hear more about at info@theagenticvoice.org. So if you haven't met Bill yet, let me introduce you to him. Bill Wesbrooks is the former director of vocal performance at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at NYU. And he's the author of the book, Dramatic Circumstances on Acting, Singing, and Living Inside the Stories We Tell. He studied psychology, theater, and music in preparation for his theatrical career, which has spanned more than 40 years and encompassed performing, directing, playwriting, and teaching. He continues to teach actively and is frequently invited to lead workshops as a respected clinician in his field. So, Bill, we are so delighted to have you here. And in full disclosure, I got to know Bill back when we were at NYU, when I was directing the PED program. He's directing the bigger vocal performance program. And so I got to see his work in action, and I saw what it did for singers to have a process in which to approach the work. And I got to also witness the electric charge that happens for the audience when we apply that process. So, Bill, I am super delighted because you are very special to me, and so this is a very special episode to my heart. And so thank you for being here.
Well, you're very special to me as well.
Amazing.
I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. But before we get into it, let's do our first segment, What's New and What's Good. And Bill, this is just where we share about something that we're excited about, something new that's happening in our personal or professional lives, and anything that you might feel comfortable sharing with anonymous listeners.
Oh, sure. Since I moved to Santa Fe is a great town if you're sort of wanting to kind of explore yourself so I do a lot of different kinds of body work, gyrotonics, which nobody knows what that is, but if you're interested, look it up because it's really great. Feldenkrais, which most people have heard of, but still don't know what it is. And I won't try to explain Feldenkrais to anybody. But my own physical body has evolved. I carry much less tension. I feel a sense of strength coming through my core, which I've learned is really your core. It's really your spine. I think a lot of people think that core strength is about, getting your abdominals all strong. So I've developed a sense of freedom and movement in my body that I'm now able to incorporate some of those cues, I'll call them, when I'm actually working with singers, different ways to get the breath low in the body, to get them relaxed and feeling free and feeling that the body can respond easily to an impulse to take an action.
Cool. It's funny because you're the second person that's come on not speaking about the Feldenkrais, but speaking about Feldenkrais.
That's right, Elizabeth. Please.
Right. I've been doing it for a long time, and if somebody said, "So what is it?" I would say, "I don't actually know." It's all about the nerves. It's the way energy and information flows through the nervous system. Ida Rolf, I don't know if you're familiar with Rolfing, that's a little more known. Ida Rolf believed that it was in the fascia. So Rolfing is about breaking down the fascia in order to create more freedom in the movement of the nervous system. Feldenkrais believed that it was in the nerves itself. And so both things are designed to sort of clear pathways so that the nerves flow more easily. I mean, there's so much information that the body provides to the brain, and we tend to think it's the other way around. And there is certainly there's information that the brain is providing, but the body is providing a lot of times much more potent information. So freeing up those pathways is the ultimate goal. of Feldenkrais, and it's a very gentle. It's a hands-on kind of movement thing, very, very, very gentle, but sort of like tracing where a nerve might move along your arm or something like that. And you feel just fantastic after a session. Really just fantastic.
That's awesome.
All the Feldenkrais practitioners just got really excited.
What's up with you, Kristen? What's new and what's good?
Well, mine is a little bit more on the sweet and simple. I think I've taken the spring cleaning idea to heart. So I spent a week out in the garden and really doing a serious, taking care of the weeds, really cultivating some of the plants that were here when we moved in, but now really making sure that they're pruned and taken care of. We had a guy come who knows about trees, do everything. So as I was doing that kind of work, I got thinking about, well, there's some updates we can do in the house as well. So we did kind of a refresher. So we have like a new table instead of an old broken down one that really wasn't storing anything. We've got a new couch. So when you walk into this space, it feels kind of bright and uplifting. And then when I was looking at that, I'm like, in my own business, when I run Sonora, and there's a couple places where there needs to be some spring cleaning in there. That one's a little harder because it has to do with more admin, less aesthetic. But it's actually been really great to kind of get in and weed out. And I'm noticing while I'm doing that, it's amazing what you learn about your own mindset, about things that need to be weeded out and things that would need to be pruned, and so that you can nurture the things that you actually want. And so I'm kind of like in the last 2 weeks having like these epiphanies that probably would mean nothing to anybody except for me. But it's been a very peaceful, deep, and thought-provoking time. So that's what I'm kind of celebrating.
Cool. I am looking forward to this long weekend. I'm going to head up to Ithaca. Yeah, I'm going to head up to Ithaca and do some hiking. Super excited about that because Ithaca is all about gorges. That's like the ongoing joke, and beautiful waterfalls and gorges. Just lovely. So
I'm gonna want some tips because we're actually heading up to like the Finger Lakes at the end of June. We're gonna go to
awesome.
like Watkins Glen and like some of
Yes.
the Seneca Lake and all of that.
I mean, there are so many like waterfall gorges up there. You can just do a different one every day. It's
All
just
right, so I want
beautiful.
tips, and I have to say I've been thinking about you because we're staying in Geneva.
Aha, cool. All right, so let's jump into our main segment, which is experience, strength, and hope. So, Bill, for our listeners who are not familiar with your work, can you describe your work and how you came into it, and why do you believe it is important work?
Yeah, I was trained as an actor to that the point of acting was the pursuit of an objective. To know, Stanislavski said, acting is behaving truthfully in imaginary circumstances. So I studied with teachers who, first of all, they took the truthfully part very seriously. You're not pretending, you're actually putting yourself into a circumstance. You're identifying what you need, what action you'll take to get what you need. I then applied that, of course, when I started directing. That's the way I would talk to actors when they were working in a scene. And then I found myself as the administrator of this program at NYU. And most people assume that the administrator, the director of a vocal performance program, is going to be a voice teacher, and they were often really surprised. I actually came into the program primarily because of my administrative skills. And so as I was organizing and coordinating, the program is large. It might be even larger now. It's about 175 students. And I was teaching acting classes. And I began to see how so many times singers had a misperception of what the task was when it came to act. First of all, they thought of it as a task. They thought of it as something that needed to be applied to them, like I'm singing and now I need to apply this thing, almost as if it were an external experience or a decision you needed to make consciously, intellectually, a decision you needed to make. So I began to see that the preparation that a singer would take about breathing in a low diaphragmatic breathing designed to, and a posture that was designed to free all this mechanism. And I particularly became aware of the idea of a released jaw and what that does. And then one of my body workers here was talking about it recently, the very thing, and sort of said, it also releases tension in your neck and shoulders if you release your jaw. So I found that if I began my work with an individual singer by getting them to this place with this released jaw and this relaxed mechanism, they were so open, they were open to suggestion. They were open to their imaginations. And so what I would say is once you find that place, then create your story. And you're creating your story from a sensory level as much as an intellectual level. I always say there are two parts to the process. There's an intellectual part, which when you write your story, and you write it powerfully, you write it intelligently, you write it creatively, and then there's how do you actually occupy that story. And that's where what I just talked about, the breathing and the suggestion, the ideas that you plant in your consciousness or that are planted there for you by me if I'm working with you. In a performance situation, they're there because of the actual story that you're participating in. And so the exciting thing for me was how singers could fully occupy their bodies as they were acting while they were singing, and that the acting did not get in the way of the singing. The acting didn't interfere with the process. In fact, intention often has an impact on sound production. So intention itself can be a positive thing. The need to communicate can help clarify the mechanism through which you're communicating. So it was sort of a win-win situation. And so I kept working with this and liking it, and the students were liking it. And then I decided to write my book, which basically describes this process and gives examples of the kind of back and forth dialogue. And there you have it. And it's my awareness in teaching. My job in teaching has evolved so nicely for me. I'm really glad I'm still teaching because it's really evolved a lot since I left NYU. There's something about not being under the pressure of a big administrative job and a lot of university stuff and teaching the classes, all that sort of stuff. So now my teaching is when I choose, and I feel actually much more effective. And that excites me, that I will keep doing it kind of as long as I can keep doing it.
Yeah. Goes to show you how much better we all perform when we're experiencing that sense of well-being for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, terrible how modern work competes with that sense of well-being.
Yeah. I often talk about it in terms of empowerment. I oftentimes talk about a circumstance that the person you're dealing with, that you are endeavoring to take your power back to prevent them from taking your power. In life, our own sense of empowerment is often severely compromised. And particularly if we're stepping into something that our first thing is like, oh, this is difficult and I'm being watched, I'm going to be judged. And so you put yourself on your back foot before you even start the process. Instead of having a process that you recognize yourself, you recognize your body, you recognize that function, you have warmed up vocally, so you're there. I watched Kristen in a class a week or so ago just work so beautifully with a singer, and she just made the sound increasingly resonant. The sound was increasingly free, so that when I stepped into work, she was bringing that level of freedom. And I think that feels like power. And I think we need to feel power, and power not in the sense that we're going to overwhelm or overcome somebody, but power in the sense that we are free to express ourselves without limitation, without judgment, without restriction.
I love that. I was curious about why you use that word empowerment, but you kind of explain that. We talk about it in terms of the word agency. That's why we named the podcast Agentic Voice. But, it's funny how these conversations that we have with different guests overlap, because it's reminding me of the conversation that we had with Bex Van Doring and how people feel such a sense of burnout when they just don't have that empowerment, when they don't have that freedom of voice, or they feel powerless. And I was thinking about how I've been feeling a little bit like that lately, and I have to remember, agency and empowerment are powerful antidotes for that kind of a feeling. So I have to think about how I can bring more of that back into my day-to-day life.
Oh, I think the idea of empowerment and, like what you said, Geneva, agency, freedom, these are topics that are so important. And then when we bring it to voice, because the voice is the expression on the outside of what's going on the inner voice, it's also tied together. And Bill, in our conversations over the years, liberation has been a common theme in some of our chats. And so, when we're thinking about helping singers, they just want to be free. They just want to be able to be free to engage in the work. So in your experience, what are you seeing that the common constraints or fears or limiting beliefs or whatever those things of disempowerment are? What are you seeing that they need to break free from?
A lot of self-judgment actively going on while you're in the process. Let me watch myself and sort of, if not correct myself, at least give myself grades as we're going along. And that we work, if you're working professionally as a singer, you want to be working professionally as a singer and actor, there's no other way to say it. You are evaluated and judged by the people for whom you sing. You're judged in performance. You're certainly evaluated and judged in audition situations. So if you say, so how do I avoid judging myself when I'm walking into a situation where 5 people behind the table who don't maybe seem particularly interested in my being there? How do I overcome that sense of judgment and the need to watch myself and be self-critical? And see, I think it's in the power of a story. It's in the power when we hear a story. If someone says, "Oh my God, this thing happened to me last week," and I'm not going to make up a whole story, but the idea is that suddenly it's like, "Oh my, it was really scary." Well, immediately, I've not only engaged the person listening, I hope, I've also engaged myself, because what my interest is in sharing this experience and having them have that experience. If you can walk into an audition room with the sense that what I'm going to do is share a story, and that doesn't have anything to do with them. I'm going to share a story and I'm going to let them watch. I'm going to let them have that experience of me and with me. So, if you're walking into the room, you can't pick a new song. It's too late to change your clothes or get a haircut. It's too late to warm up if you haven't. It's too late to take a voice lesson. It's like, so what are you bringing into the room? What are you bringing you? And what is the most interesting, most compelling you? And I think is the you that's engaged in storytelling through and through all of these sort of wonderful things that we've all experienced. To me, there's nothing more exciting or compelling than a singer who is totally engaged in the story, and it's reflected in their voice, it's reflected in a lot of the things that I think sometimes people worry about. A lot of them start to come naturally. Dynamics, punctuation, breath, those things, the material we're working with, for the most part, was written by people who really understand that or understood that. And so the dynamic in a piece of music doesn't have to be there because it's indicated. It's there because of the need to communicate. And if you can experience a real need to communicate, chances are that when you get louder, when you become more present, when you sort of back away, become more tender, more thoughtful, that all coincides with what's written on the page. A lot of singers, particularly more classically trained singers, and depending where you study, if you study at a conservatory, if you're studying musical theater at a conservatory, you're very likely to have a more, for want of a better word, serious sort of vocal training, concentrated vocal training. There are music theater programs across the country that don't offer voice lessons. Voice lessons aren't part of the training.
Yeah.
And I know of one where in the music department, it's offered through the music department. Well, the voice teachers, who are all classically trained, and they have no interest in teaching music theater and singers. And rather than going out and finding those people, they just say, well, they'll put them in a voice class. Then they graduate with a degree, a BFA, that says they're trained in music theater performance, and they essentially never had a voice lesson.
Well, and you spoke to the idea of singers dealing with self-judgment. I think that's definitely one of the things they struggle with. Another one that I hear a lot is their desire for consistency. I think a lot of us have had a performance that was transcendent, and you spend the next 3 years trying to get back to that moment and can't exactly replicate it. So, can you talk a little bit about how you help singers get repeatable, you know, truthful performances where they have some spontaneity and freshness, but also it's repeatable, like they can continue to do it
Right.
even on days where they show up tired.
I think the key is always starting at the beginning. I think that the process of creating a story and occupying a story, that becomes increasingly efficient. And with a specific story, it is more efficient. It still has to start at the beginning. You have to start your story at the beginning. You frequently, when we have a good experience, then the next time we want to jump to that good experience. And then we start watching and listening, and this doesn't feel the same, and why doesn't? And I can give you a good example of an actress I worked with in a production of Ragtime. And she sings Daddy's Son to her child. And I would say, sing to the baby. You tried to run away from the baby. You actually tried to kill the baby. You were so frightened. Just sing to the baby. And she would sing to the baby, and it would be pretty phenomenal. I mean, she had the voice was there for her, all of that. So we'd go along in rehearsal 2 or 3 days, and she said, I've lost it. I lost it. And all I ever had to say was sing to the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Song is about the baby, not about you. It's not about what you're feeling. It's not about what you're feeling will reveal itself as you try to take care of the baby. So the key is to start at the beginning. And that beginning is that physically, that beginning is that breath and that occupation of the body and the release of tension. And then the idea, what is the idea? And let that start to spark you. Now, I've worked with people, I think it's interesting. I've had conversations with Elena Shadow, who teaches at NYU and performs a lot, and she took over the lead in Light in the Piazza, the girl on Light in the Piazza, and she took over the national tour of King and I. And so I've talked to her about that process, and she talks about how do you keep this alive so you are present in it. It's a combination of knowing the story and knowing where to start, and over a long run, it's also a combination of ways that you kind of embellish the story, or you heighten the story, or you have the story take a slightly different turn.
Mm-hmm.
In an ideal situation, you're getting that immediacy from the person you're singing to.
Mm-hmm.
There was a play done here, a really marvelous play. And we took a theater party to it, and then they came back to our house after. And the play was quite emotional, and the people wanted to know, well, how did they cry? You know, how do they just cry? And then they wanted to know about, like, you know, since maybe you think about, you know, when your dog died, you know, all of this sort of stuff. And I said, well, I'm not going to speak for these actors. I have subsequently spoken to the actors, and they confirmed what I'm about to say, is that if you had David and Rizzo, I think was her name, Rizzo made David cry. David made Rizzo cry. They were trying to reach some kind of, well, actually, she was trying to reach reconciliation, and he was refusing. And they were ending a lifelong relationship. They were cousins and had grown up together, and they were now in their like late 30s. The immediacy of, I'm dealing with this person who is begging me for my forgiveness, and I'm refusing to give it. And an actor is able to step into that story and have that fully realized experience.
What are your thoughts on singers studying themselves on videotapes?
Gosh, you know, I don't know that I've ever, one, been asked that, or ever had an experience.
I've had a
where
couple
that was
singers recently who,
Yeah, well,
who said
I
they were
would
instructed
think,
to do so, and I was wondering what your thoughts were.
my first reaction is that it's not a good idea. I mean, talk about being self-critical and judgmental. You're liable to see things that you absolutely cannot control, or you cannot control consciously. If someone observing you sees something that they would like they'd like you to have a different experience of that thing, and therefore maybe a different outcome, it's never a good idea to say, okay, so this is what you're doing wrong, and this is what we need to fix. It's like a suggestion. Okay, let's think about this. Let's see what happens if we go here. And then time by time, if you're on the right track, and sometimes it takes several attempts to be on the right track, then over time, that thing that was of concern takes care of itself. At which point you can acknowledge it, you know, so that they can know
After it's on a higher
consciously,
higher
you know,
ground,
well,
yeah.
because people are likely to have told them.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. You mentioned that since your time at NYU, there's been some significant shifts or realizations. What are some of the things that you're incorporating into your work now compared to, you know, say 5, 7 years ago, however long it's been?
Um, I think one of the traps of teaching is letting the extent to which you let your ego get involved. And I think private teaching, like voice teaching and teaching acting and stuff, I think that really can kind of lend itself to more ego on the part of the instructor than is useful. Oftentimes the instructors were performers or wanted to be performers and have their own sense of themselves and their stature. And if as a teacher, if you're trying to empower yourself through your teaching, I think that's a bad idea. If you're trying to have an impact on the student because that positive impact reflects well on you, that's a bad idea. And I don't say that I was doing that specifically, but I think that I had a hard time pulling myself, my sense of self, my own self-criticism, my own watching myself work. I had trouble stepping away from that. And I think being retired, and it's like, not needing to prove anything, not needing to be hired to do what I do, just kind of took away some pressure that then allowed, being personal, allowed me in my own growth as a person to recognize how much I felt judged my whole life, how much I judged myself my whole life, and thinking, well, at this point, maybe you might want to stop that. And being in a situation where I've sort of learned more and more how to do that.
That's some similar sentiment to what Olivia expressed in our episode 1 for this season, just about how much more authentic you can be when you're not having that pressure of, I need these people to like me, then you can focus on what it is that you want to share, be authentic to your art or your teaching or whatever it is,
Right.
as opposed to, I need these people to like me or, compete and that kind of thing.
Right.
Kind of agentic voice.
Yes.
Yes.
So as we move into our final segment, agentic practices, we like to ask our guests to feature an agentic practice that would lead to freedom of voice, freedom of expression, empowerment of performers. You've talked about storytelling. I don't know how you want to kind of bring it home for us.
Well, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here.
Yeah.
The power of stories is something that just it continues to fascinate me. We express ourselves through stories. We learn by experiencing stories. We can change our consciousness through stories. Like so many movies, plays, novels, the idea that I'm going to follow this one person through this experience, and suddenly my investment in that story makes me understand something more about what it would be like to live in that world, to be that person. It can really expand your consciousness, your sense of empathy, sympathy, compassion. And all that comes through identification with that character. That's kind of what I'm talking about when you're actually creating the story, your sense of identification. So perhaps you have a story where, I don't know, someone you love with all your heart ends the relationship. And I think almost anybody can go, oh, well, I get that. That's happened. And that's not to say that in order to experience that, you go back and relive your own breakup. You can if you want to. The other thing I always say, incidentally, is that these stories are private. The stories, as far as I'm concerned, belong to the actor singer. And I never ask what the story is. I'm happy to discuss it to the extent that the singer wants to, but I'm not asking people to reveal out loud their innermost thoughts and feelings. I'm asking them to sort of allow those innermost thoughts and feelings to begin to have an impact on the way they communicate. I think, the way certain movies, certain plays, certain musicals, operas, the way they just become sort of eternal and timeless is because they tell a story that people identify with. And so I think your commitment to living inside your story is the way you are most likely to create a sense of connection with the people who are watching you perform.
I really appreciate you saying that. Speech pathologists tend to look at stories from a different perspective. We look at when people cannot tell a story or their story is impaired because of a language disorder or an emotional issue like trauma, right? And we try to equip people, patients, clients, with the skills to be able to tell their story cohesively, to be comprehended by others, but also to facilitate social connection. So it's interesting, Bill, that the first thing you did, one of the first things you did when you came on today, was you told Kristen and I a simple story about your car and the technology in your new car. And I remember feeling when you were telling us this, oh, he's about to tell us a story. And I was thinking, oh, he's an actor. This is going to be so good. Those were my thoughts. Those were my thoughts.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, save it for the podcast. And I was like, I do believe, as you say, in the power of a story. And if you can tap into your authentic story, this is something for me when I'm singing or performing, how much that does facilitate connection and, I don't know, making others feel like they're relatable, right? I love that. I love that as an agentic practice. And when you look at what was recommended through our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration for people who have had trauma, shared stories and lived experiences are an agentic practice. I think you're the first person to kind of really bring that out in the sense of performance. So thank you.
Frequently, the engagement in the stories that I'm talking about will cause the singer to break down, to cry, to not be able to make sound. And the first time when that happens, I've had through all of my career, I've had either the singer say, well, that can't happen. I have to sing the song. I've had voice teachers say that can't happen. She has to sing the song. And I always say she will sing the song. She needs to live inside this story to the point where her need to communicate is more powerful, is stronger than the impact the story is having on her heart. And she'll find that. And it will be all the more powerful because she will understand exactly what this is costing her, the character. What is this costing the character to have this experience? And will have her voice and her words to start to share that. That thought came to me when you were talking about helping someone tell the story who has impediments
Yes.
to telling their story. And it's when my book came out, one of the reviews said, well, he just oversimplifies everything. He just says, if you do this, then everything will work. I'm not really saying it that way, but I'm saying that there's a direct, pure way to head into your story and live inside your story, that takes care of a whole lot of other stuff. Doesn't take care of everything, but it takes care of a whole lot of other stuff.
Yeah, an authentic environment is not necessarily a controlled one.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it can be
Mhm.
messy for
Right,
sure.
right.
And so I like when people talk about get perfectionism out of opera or music. You
Mhm.
know, it might not be perfect, but it's going to be authentic and it's going to be compelling for sure.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And in a rehearsal situation, you have to have the creative team, the director leading it, but also a musical director, conductor. You have to be, they have to be willing to let things get a little messy. And in music theater, particularly, there are very few directors and choreographers who will tolerate much mess. You know, they're headed toward a product that they know is going to work. My product is going to work if you do this, this, and this. I just read Barbara Cook's memoir, and when she did She Loves Me with Hal Prince directed every single beat of her performance, of everyone's performance. She said um, she had never been directed like that. She had never had to sort of find an inside way to achieve a prescribed result.
Mhm.
And she said, you know, she thinks he's a brilliant director, and that she loved the show and she loved doing it. She said, I can't help but wonder what we could have brought if he allowed us to actually be part of the process,
Mm.
you know, um, and which is an interesting idea. And more, I think that's what directors want. I think that's more and more in music theater. Music theater is certainly much less formulaic than it was for a long time.
I think there's just I'm thinking about your work and the way you talk about it. It's a special lens to understand the power of story, what it means to embody the story, what that means for voice and freedom. So I want to make a quick announcement also for anybody interested in learning more about this kind of work. Bill, you have some workshops coming up. So we can have people reach out to us here if you want more information on how to participate in some of that kind of training.
Bill, thank you for everything that you shared. That was really, really great. In this episode, we discussed empowering singers through the use of storytelling with Bill Wesbrooks. You can find out more about Bill's work in today's episode notes, where we have referenced his book. And if you enjoy today's content, please don't forget to subscribe to the Agentic Voice Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, take care.